So I graded your quizzes this morning, and I put together this short PowerPoint to kind of explain what this was all about. And so here is the prompt, just like you saw it on the assignments page. Identify the image by the subject matter, size, media date, and place of creation. And most of you did that pretty well. There were different names, the Christ, the Forgiver, and other different ones, but it was all good. I didn't have any problem with that. Describe the elements of the iconography and what they represent. Support your answer with information gathered from the internet and textbook. So, 1, this is the image, and see, this is Christ's blessing is how it appears in the textbook. And it's at the monastery of St. Catherine, Mount Sinai, Egypt, 6th century, encaustic on wood. Most of you, almost all of you got this. In one way or another, it was good. And then I have this, the second part of this is describe the elements of the iconography and what they represent. Support your answer with information gathered from the internet and textbook. So these were kind of 7 large answers. These are kind of general categories. And number 1 being the halo. Some of you didn't put the halo down, and I assume that what is going on is that is like so common, and it's almost a given that you didn't write about it. But I wanted you to describe the elements of the iconography. So, halo, the Bible, a lot of you guys got that one. The Bible being Old and New Testament, and this was kind of a new idea, relatively new idea, because at the time, the councils at Nicaea were putting those books together to create a Bible. And they were going through old documents, and they were going through Torah and other historical accounts, written accounts, letters to the Philippians, say, and they were deciding what was going to go in the Bible. And so that is what he's carrying. And the fact that it has a cross on it, and some of you address this as well. The Bible was put together in such a manner, and the books from the Jewish tradition were selected in a way that supports the anticipation of Christ, that God will send a Messiah. And there are other passages in the Old Testament that foretell the arrival of Christ. And so this is a Bible, and so that's really important in the fact that it's got a cross on it. And the halo, by the way, like I said, it should have been a given, but you can see this is a very special halo. It's got, you got to look closely, but it has the cross behind his head, which separates him from other holy figures, such as the Virgin Mary, angels, and saints. And so he has a Jesus halo. The gesture, you guys gave me some good answers on this, and they were a little different. I expected that because the interpretation and the legacy is a little different from scholar to tradition. But some of you talked about this as being a gesture of governing. And this Christ's blessing, this is a sign of a blessing. It is a sign of a pardon. It is, and one person actually wrote about the Greek iconography and doing letters in hand sign language, which was pretty interesting. And so the robe, this is all worn out. It's encaustic, and sometimes encaustic loses its color. But this originally was a purple robe. A lot of you guys wrote about that. I didn't know if that I had expected that. I was kind of expecting halo, Bible, gesture, and then one of these on the bottom. But the robe, a lot of you wrote about, and it's absolutely correct, and that it's purple because it is a sign of royalty.
Yeah, I found that online.
Yeah, it's correct. And that was good. I was really happy to see that. And so this is tied into the issue of how do you make Christ both a king and a commoner. He was somebody who in his lifetime never accumulated any wealth. He just kind of went from place to place and pretty much depended on the charity of others. He was a carpenter, but there's no really account that he made a lot of money doing that. And so he was a pauper, he was a common man, and he was also a king. And so you describe him kind of like a regular everyman and put him in a robe that is royal. And so the eyes, you got a number of you guys talked about this. I was happy to see it. Talked about and this is the eyes and the face and the symmetry in the beard. I kind of expected at least one of those aspects, but a lot of you had talked about how the face is asymmetrical. And one side is forgiveness, and the other side is stern, biblical law. Be good, do not sin. And so, and that kind of goes along with the pardon blessing of the hand, and it goes along with the holy book, the Bible, because the Bible contains the rules on how to be a good person, starting with the 10 Commandments. And so all of the time in Jesus's life, he's talking about things that you should do to be a better person. Just a few quotes. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. If it belongs to somebody else, give it to them. It's theirs. Don't fight over it. Turn the other cheek. Retribution is not the Christian way. So on. And so anyway, the eyes represent two different sides of Jesus, and that is part of the asymmetry. Some of you wrote about the beard, and that is a sign of wisdom, which is true. And that is another thing that they struggled with in the early days of developing the iconography of Christianity. And so we saw a number of examples that part of it was that Christ was young when he was crucified, so they have him without a beard. Yeah, Portia, how you doing? And so that is that is part of the iconography. There's something that nobody really touched on, at least directly, but talked about the eyes in a way that they were very prominent on his face. Well, if you go back to what we looked at in Mesopotamian art, which was really the chapter right after cave art, that's where the early civilizations developed, Assyrians and others, Babylonians. And in their sculpture and in their interpretation of the human face, they often gave their statues big eyes. And that was to represent that if you had big eyes, you could see more. You see more than ordinary people. And certainly that's part of the Christian faith, that God is all seeing. And so his eyes are big, and it's a symbolism, and it's part of the iconography. And so that is the 6 I was looking for. A few of you gave me all 6. Some of you, like I say, it was surprising to find that some of you missed the halo. Don't forget the obvious elements of the iconography. And so I have a good example here. And I put in, highlighted some of the issues that go exactly right with the list that I just showed you. And here is another name for this image, the Pantocrator. And it's the same one, the St. Catherine in Sinai in Egypt. But like I say, this has a number of names. It was important that you realize that this is Christ. But anyway, seen dressed in a purple robe. That's the robe part. The purple is commonly used to represent royalty, high status, as well as importance. Christ with a significant amount of facial hair. The beard usually resembles, but that probably should read represents wiseness, and that should probably be wisdom, but I'm not picking at the grammar. I like the idea, and it does represent wisdom. He is seen holding a thick gospel book. Just like I said earlier, the Bible, critical part of the iconography, and is decorated with symbols or jewels in the form of a cross in the center. And the whole idea of the Bible is that it is a continuation of the Judaic text. This is all founded on Judaism and how the Jewish people foretold that there would be a Messiah. And so his other hand is slightly raised as if he is gesturing a blessing. That's another one of them. His eyes are asymmetrically sized, and his hair is asymmetrically placed. That's what I mean about the division of the face. One side is the stern law of God. The other side is the Christ of forgiveness. And so the two sides are duality of Christ. The left side resembles human nature, and it is in a warm light, while the right side shows deeper facial features, trace, and like the gospel, that resemble his divinity. Behind him is a glow or a halo. This element in the background of the painting separates and identifies the subject as the icon of Christ. So here it is. All of these are right there. Here's another good example too. It doesn't really have everything, but I put this in here because it did dig down pretty nicely. And it is that he's in purple, symbolizing imperial status, left hand raised for a blessing, gospel, asymmetrical face in the dual nature of Christ. The divine, the human. And so that is what iconography is all about. And so what I wanted to say too is that some of you guys went into some discussion about how iconography was frowned upon in certain sectors and things like that. That part is true, but that's not really what I'm asking you. Whoever made this, the culture that produced this, the religion it supports, they were good with iconography, and they didn't have a second commandment issue about false idols. And so that's almost like a whole other thing. But I gave you this quiz and I put it this way because I think that analyzing what the artwork means is really very important. And this period, the Byzantine period, art carried quite a load. What I mean by that is that it had a lot of meaning. It was packed with symbols and references. And it wasn't just Christ, but it was all of these things too. And so that is, at least I hope, in a sense, preparation for your group presentation. And so I got another PowerPoint. And here's my share screen. And that is that slideshow from the beginning. And so part of this prompt for the group presentations is about formal analysis and power structure belief systems. And I kind of combined these two together. And it's critical that you understand why it is the stuff we look at looks the way it does. You would see Christ blessing, but you wouldn't see like bluebirds and cherry blossoms. It wouldn't have anything to do with anything, not the story they're trying to tell. So this is, I'll run to that one quick. The government, that's going to be one of the first places you want to look when you're talking about the power or the belief system. And so when I say government, we're talking about an emperor, a monarch, or a pope, or whoever is in charge. Whoever is in charge likely has the power and the wealth to be able to build those buildings, pay sculptors to carve those statues or cast them, and to make those paintings and illustrated manuscripts and whatever it is you're doing, oil paintings. It's the wealthy. And so that has everything to do, it has something to do with why the artwork looks the way it does. And I have this other bullet point here, the prevailing philosophy. We talked about the pantheon. I have that on a bullet point. And how Icatinos and Callicrates, the two engineers, the two architects that designed the Parthenon. Oh, I have Pantheon. Oh, I got to check that. Typo. Parthenon. Should have had a V8. Parthenon, Greek goddess, mathematical ideas. Icatinos and Callicrates had this idea that math was almost in itself like a religion, that math could explain anything and everything, and they were really good at it. They invented stuff like geometry, and they were very good at measuring things, and they were very good at fooling the eye. And they talk about that when we saw the film, says it in the book, other places, that it is about ideals, mathematical ideals, as well as it's about Athena, the Greek goddess. And if you would go into that aspect of it, you could talk about polytheism, the religion where there are many gods. Poly is many, theism is gods. And so that's the kind of stuff that actually influences how this stuff looks and why it was even built or painted or sculpted in the first place. The Colosseum, the grand stadium, Flavian's amphitheater, as it was called. And it was about the Emperor Flavian kind of wielding his power. It was a show of force. That, look, I am the great Flavian. I can build this great stadium, this great place where we will have gladiator fights and circuses and parades and mock battles and stuff. And so part of the Roman Empire's governing system really emphasized keeping people happy in the empire. And we see in Rome, there's all kind of stuff just dedicated to entertainment. We see amphitheaters, we see the Colosseum, we see we see that they do horse racing. I'm trying to think, hippodrome? No, what is it? Bottom line, it was about entertaining the people. That's what they thought they should do. Madonna and Child, which is just like what you guys wrote about with Christ. And it is about Christianity, and Christianity at the time of those Byzantine Christ and those Madonna and Child paintings. Christianity was the prevailing religion at the time. And as I've been saying, bottom line, it's about orthodoxy. It's about, to put it bluntly, getting everybody on the same page, that they're all believing in Christianity the way that we understand it. And if you don't believe all of this stuff, then maybe you're not a Christian. And again, pull back. The Nicene Creed, if you go to Mass, they say it just before the communion. We believe in one God, Father the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen. That's what you got to believe, or you're not a Christian. And so that's really what this promotes. And I use the word again, iconography. Iconography is how they spell it out. And they spell it out in a way that transcends written language. In a way that if you're not even literate and you can't read a Bible, you can get from the iconography what you need to know. And sometimes we have dual power systems, like religious emperors. For instance, Constantine, an emperor and a Christian. Another good example is Justinian the First, Justinian the Great. Christianity, he's a Roman emperor, and he's building places of worship all over the Roman Empire. And San Vitale, that's the one that has, in Ravenna, that has the mosaics of Justinian and Theodora. And so that's what I mean by the power system. I had this question last week, and I had some people kind of trying to deal with the idea of formal analysis. And let me get the screen share right there. Can you see that? The J. Paul Getty Museum? Should I take that as a yes?
We can see it, yes.
Okay, good. And so formal analysis, what I did was basically put in a Google search, formal analysis. And here is the elements of art. This is kind of what you're really dealing with here. And it says, list below describes each element of art. Now I ask you to identify the elements of the iconography, which in itself is a system of elements put together for meaning. This is basically much more fundamental. And these are the elements, as they say, the elements of art. And so line defines it. Those of you who are studio artists probably know a lot of this already, but there's a worksheet that introduces students to the concept of line. Horizontal, this is an element. Horizontal lines suggest a feeling of rest or repose because objects parallel to the earth or at rest. But vertical lines create a sense of height because they are perpendicular to the earth, extending upward towards the sky. And vertical lines suggest spirituality, rising beyond human reach towards the heavens. Just saying, we'll be looking at Islamic art here, and that will be this vertical line and the reach to the heavens, rising beyond human reach. It's a big part of Islamic architecture. That's what the minarets are all about. And so these things kind of go together, and sometimes, like things like color, we talked about color being symbolic, purple, Christ's robe, royalty, importance. And so these are the elements without the imagery. And so diagonal lines and a curved line, and shape and form. all of this. And whatever you choose, it may or may not demonstrate the use of all of these things. Certainly, geometric shapes and forms are pretty common, but oftentimes the artists, the architects, the sculptors don't use anything resembling geometric shapes. For instance, this rearing horse, there is no geometry in that. It's biomorphic. It's a biomorphic shape. It's a biomorphic subject. And so, or they call it organic now, but it's typically irregular or asymmetrical, but not always. How an artist used space. We're using this same illustration, Peter Jan's three-dimensional space, vertical lines. So they all kind of go together. And so this is what formal analysis is. This link is in this PowerPoint, and it is on today's module. So this is what I'm talking about with the design principles and what I was talking about with the power structures. So that's what that means. That's what this is about. And so I have that now. Let's go right to this new share. The Islamic world. Slideshow from the beginning. And can you see the Islamic world where you're at?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. So do you guys, if you guys have any questions about what formal analysis is and how that, and what I mean by power structures and belief systems, that's it. If you got something that presents something of a problem, a question, everything can be a little puzzling at times. For instance, this is not one you could choose, but this picture right here on the left, it's the cover of the book. It is Johannes Vermeer in the studio. And so what would this be in terms of power structure and belief systems? Any guesses? Well, let me tell you. This was painted in Northern Europe after the Reformation. And so what we have is the Protestant ethic, if you will. And it is basically how they practiced Christianity in much of Northern Europe. And Vermeer is one of the great painters of that Dutch painter tradition, along with others like Rembrandt and so on. But just the subject matter itself is in some ways a lot more democratic than, small d democratic, than what we've seen. Because artists of other places and of other centuries didn't make anything like this unless it was in service to or in praise of a leader, an emperor, a general, a great person, or a religion. And this guy, although a painter is kind of a esteemed position and somebody that would gain some reverence and notoriety, he is not a monarch. He's not a god. So this Protestantism kind of changes how people see things, period. And so the Protestant Reformation actually led to a lot of Europeans accepting this as art. Second thing, it was more important to make this naturalistic and realistic and less symbolic. We just looked at Christ's blessing, full of symbolism and not very natural. And in fact, the natural was kind of ignored in favor of symbolism. It was more important to have the symbols right than to have the anatomy right. I think one of you guys actually said that in the quiz, that his head and shoulders were out of proportion. That was so true. But that wasn't why they made it. It wasn't a study in anatomy, or in this case, this is a study in anatomy. It's a study in light. It's a study in realism. So that's what I'm talking about. I got a bonus question for you here. I don't have any points to give out, but what's this thing right here? It's got a little red ball on the end. It's a stick. Any painters?
Isn't it so that you can keep your hand steady without touching the painting itself?
We have a winner, Charlotte. That's exactly what that is. It's called a maul, and it's called a maul stick by some, and that's it. You hold it so you can keep your hand steady while you're trying to do all of this fine detail work. Absolutely. Good job. So, the Islamic world, around 1500. And so what we have here, this is quite a lot of territory. Islamic religion has spread. It's gone, and it's actually gone farther east than what the map shows. But at any rate, here we go. And we know where the holy sites are. Mecca is the holy site. Medina is a holy site. Jerusalem, Damascus, all of these places, a lot of them in here in Iraq and Iran. This is the Muslim world, the Islamic world, around 1500. They have some things here in pink, and it says former Muslim territories. Bottom line is that Spain kind of goes back and forth. It was the Visigoths in ancient Roman times, and then the Moors came in across the Strait of Gibraltar, and they were Islamic, and they established Islam in what they called Moorish Spain. And then, it's the 12th century or so, there was a guy named El Cid, and he declared war on the Muslims and drove them out. And basically, because this part of the world was Catholic Christian. And so anyway, a religious war. And anyway, but Islam did not go away, and there were some Islamic rulers, especially in the southern part of Spain, even up through 1500. And so I think they, in the book, it said it basically ended in 1492, but just saying, it's a significant big part of the world. It's much of what the Roman Empire was, and even more. And so This is the first slide, and I got this as a starred item. And part of that is because this is really the first truly dedicated Islamic architecture. It's a Dome of the Rock. It's in Jerusalem, and it is a World Heritage Site. And as I was talking about, you can tell power structure here. What's that about? Well, we have Islamic rulers in the 7th century. Islam is spread from the Arabian Peninsula all the way up to Jerusalem, and they built the Dome on the Rock. It's one of the oldest Islamic architecture buildings in the whole world. And so what does it, how does the religion influence its design? Well, the influence comes from a lot of places. You'll see in this a lot of things that are right out of the Greco-Roman style, and especially this dome. The Romans were big on domes, and the Muslim architects were like that again. This has an octagon shape. That means 8-sided. If we would look at it from above, it looked like a stop sign. Well, that's the same shape as San Vitale in Ravenna that Justinian built. So it has a lot of similarities to Greco-Roman and Byzantine architecture, but there are significant differences. And one of them is that in a Christian house of worship, a holy building, a cathedral, you would see pictures of saints and angels and Jesus and all of that. That's not happening here. It's extremely decorative, and instead of people, which is, as we talked about a number of times, they took the second commandment about graven images, they took that very seriously. And so they put quotes from the Quran, the holy book of Islam, and that's what's up here. And they had, you know, it's like a lot of things. Some people are strict adherents to not doing any representation, up to and including no depictions of animals or flora, and except for maybe in a holy building, but for the most part, this is like exquisite geometric design. And one of the things that they do in this architecture is that they use archways, and something that's really close to a Corinthian capital on the columns, but on their archways, there's this is an Islamic thing. They use different colored bricks to create this pattern to accentuate that archway. Now, the Dome on the Rock, this is a kind of a contentious thing too, because it was, was kind of a contentious thing because it had this is believed to be the rock on which Abraham was to sacrifice his son Isaac. And if you know the Bible, it talks about God said to Abraham, give me a son. Oh, that's from Bob Dylan, but bottom line, Highway 61. Hey, just saying. But bottom line is that that's one of the the tenets of faith, that's been part of the religion from Judaism through Christianity and into Islam. And so they really are, they're monotheistic, and they believe in the one God that all of those three religions believe. They believe in, as I said earlier, Abraham, Moses. They believe in Jesus, but they look at Jesus more as a prophet or a messenger. And they look at Muhammad as a prophet as well. And so anyway, this is where, at least in some belief systems, this is where Abraham sacrificed Isaac, and that this is where Muhammad ascended into heaven. And that's a faith thing too, because Jesus died on the cross. On the third day, he rose from the dead and spent some time, we think 40 days, ministering to his people and his disciples. And when they saw him, that was Pentecost, and everybody started speaking in tongues. The idea of St. Thomas, one of the apostles who was not there on Pentecost, didn't believe that Jesus had resurrected. Anyway, bottom line, at the end of all of that, Jesus ascended into heaven as well. So these religions are very similar in a lot of ways. And so this is the inside of the dome of the rock in Jerusalem. And this is the first Muslim holy place. And you can see here, this is kind of interesting photography, how they have this. You can see the insides of the arches. And I wanted to give you guys a little bit of current history about this. And so let me go to this link. And so and I'm not getting much volume here. Oh.
Stark and so unforgiving. The landscape of the Bible is as brutal as it is breathtaking. Here, it's easy to imagine the suffering and the patience it took for a family to survive in Abraham's time, and why it's here that God would demand a sacrifice so stark and so unforgiving that he would never again ask for anything like it.
I'm standing under the rock where Muslims believe the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. And this is home to all three religions, because Jews and Christians believe that this is where God commanded Abraham to bring his son Isaac for sacrifice.
Today, this place is marked by the familiar gold dome of the rock that dominates the old city of Jerusalem.
And it sits on one of the most contested sites in the world. Even the name of this site is complicated. Jews call it the Temple Mount, while Muslims call it Haram al-Sharif, or Noble Sanctuary.
On one side is the Western Wall, the holiest site that Jews come to pray, and nearby, the Christian Church of the Holy Sepulchre. In just 1 square mile, the most revered places of each of the three religions. And this is also the place where the Bible tells us that God had finally demanded too much. Abraham had waited into very old age for the children that God had promised. He had already been told to send his first son, Ishmael, away. Now, only Isaac was left at home.
Abraham, for better or for worse, is used to hearing God's voice. And one day, as the Torah tells us in Genesis 22, God decides to test Abraham. And he says, take your son, your only son, whom you love, and offer him as a sacrifice at the place that I will show you.
God was telling Abraham to kill his own son.
You would think that that story is so barbaric that it would have died out over time. Instead, Jews read it in their holiest week of the year on Rosh Hashanah. Christians read it, the same story, in their holiest week of the year in Easter. Muslims read it, the same story, in their holiest week of the year.
To this day, the story is commemorated by Muslims all over the world on a holiday called Eid al-Adha. The Hassan family are American Muslims living in New Jersey. One son, Yusef, is about the same age Abraham's son would have been, and he's trying to imagine how he would have felt.
He was probably extremely scared at what was going to happen, and he was very worried for his dad because he knew his dad was going through a long trouble just getting over the fact that he had to kill his own son. But I'm sure he understood that they're coming from a higher power.
For Jews and Christians too, the story of what happened next is the same. Abraham's faith was absolute. He didn't argue with God. He tied up his son and laid him on the rock, and then he drew his knife.
And as the story goes, Abraham literally lifts the knife before God says, Abraham, Abraham, you don't have to do this.
So the son was spared, and a lamb appeared to take his place.
One of the abiding lessons we're meant to learn from Genesis is obedience to God. That if you are obedient, then in the end you are rewarded.
Muslims believe Ishmael, not Isaac, was the son Abraham was called upon to sacrifice. But the essence of the story is the same across the three religions.
Is it heartbreaking to think that this patriarch, this person who we believe is the father of our religion, was this close to committing murder, killing his son?
I don't know if it's heartbreaking or not, but I know that it's eye-opening and that it's important because Abraham introduces the idea you can kill in the name of God. And I think it's important for everybody to understand that this idea is embedded in these biblical stories. This is not all, kumbaya and can we all live in peace and say, oh, you like butterflies and love your children and therefore we can all get along.
And yet the story is not an endorsement of killing in the name of God.
So it's a test. God is testing him. He doesn't really intend for him to kill his son.
At a time when offering human sacrifice was common, this story was a call to end that barbaric practice. Still, here and in so many places around the world, so many thousands of years later, the sacrifice of sons and daughters in the name of God and faith goes on and tragically on. God may have been demanding total submission, but he also decided in the end that a human life has more value than blind obedience.
And in the end, of course, Ishmael lives, Isaac lives.
And taking this journey with my own son Darius brought these stories to life in the most profound and visceral way. It was a reminder of how personal the stories of our ancient religious texts can feel, and why they remain so powerful even to this day.
And darn, losing my Okay, I gotta say, these guys do not like to have videos embedded. It's telling me I can't share the screen that I want to share with you. So anyway, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, the reason I showed you that video is because I wanted to point out how closely related all of those three great Abrahamic religions are tied together in our similarities. And the other part of it is, it said that this was in the title, one of the most contested landmarks. And what we have here in this day and age is a fight over Jerusalem and who it belongs to. And a lot of people from all three religions have a stake there. And it won't be the only time we see that it is contentious, these holy sites and this holy architecture. So that's all I have for today. You guys good? I'll say, okay. Well, good. Have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you Wednesday.